Welcome to this episode of Unraveling Adoption, an intentional space to delve into adoption's complexities together. I'm Beth Syverson. I'm an adoptive mom of a courageous and insightful 20-year-old son, Joey, who is struggling to find his healing path. I am walking beside him while working on my own personal growth and healing. I'm also a certified coach, helping primarily other adoptive parents. Joey and I are committed to helping anyone impacted by adoption, and we want to help the general public understand adoption's complexities better too. So listeners, if you are an adopted person yourself, you will probably be nodding your head a lot through today's episode. If you're not adopted, I wonder if you've ever thought about the ramifications of not knowing your genetic history. What kind of complications could that create for both your physical and mental health? Well, we're going to hear from an adoptee whose life was made much harder because of the lack of biological health information when he was adopted. Our guest today is Jeremy, a 24-year-old adopted person from Texas. And for as long as he can remember, he struggled with a number of health issues and also neurodivergence. But it wasn't until 2022, when he was reunited with his birth family, that he realized that many of his issues are genetic. Let's find out the ramifications of blocking one's health information from them when they are adopted. So thanks for being here on Unraveling Adoption, Jeremy.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, well, first, why don't you just tell us a brief outline of your adoption story? How old were you? Where were you adopted from? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So I was adopted in Albuquerque, New Mexico. My birth family's from Denver. My adoption process was not really premeditated. It happened within 48 hours. So there was just kind of a lot of shifty things going on, but the judge approved it, so I guess it's okay.
Wow.
My birth certificate didn't have my birth father on it, and she left a name for another man. And I've seen this man actually, and I'm a very tall, blonde, fair-skinned person. And the man that she said that was my father was very dark-haired, burly kind of guy who did not really look like me. Mm-hmm. So I knew from a young age when I was looking on Facebook that maybe I didn't know who my father was. And then I was the firstborn of my adopted family's kids. I had another younger sibling, a sister, who's 3 years younger than me. We moved to Texas for a job opportunity for my dad when I was about 4 or 5. And I've lived in Texas since. Okay. And I grew up homeschooled. My parents were very big in the church. We went to church 3 times a week. And I always wondered about my adoption. I looked for my birth mom pretty much anytime we were in public. I wondered if I would run across her.
Oh, okay. You just looked for people that looked like you?
Yeah.
A woman around the right age?
Exactly. I looked for people who looked like me because I have distinctive facial features, I feel, and it was always hard to find anyone who mirrored me. Mm-hmm. Especially as I got older and started to realize that I was different even from other kids, not just for my adoption, but for what I didn't know at the time was my neurodivergence. Mm-hmm. And it just was an interesting time. And my adopted mom is also an adoptee from the baby scoop era. Mm. And so sometimes I felt like she was empathizing with me, but sometimes it felt like it was just her baggage onto me,
Without telling too much of her story, but is she quote unquote out of the fog? Was she able to help you with your adoption trauma, or was that even part of her language?
No, she doesn't really associate herself with adoption topics or anything.
Okay, so were you just supposed to fit in and get along? It sounds like they weren't very proactive in helping you manage your adoption story or your pain from that.
Mm-hmm. Well, I feel like something that my adoptive parents did right is they always told me that I was adopted.
Okay.
They're always very open about it. Mm-hmm. But the picture that they painted of my birth mom just wasn't very positive.
Okay. What were the stories you grew up with about your origin?
Well, just that she was poor, or that she didn't know how to manage things, or that she already had kids, because I have an older biological sister, or that she was irresponsible with her family planning. Mm-hmm. Okay. And she did smoke cigarettes while she was pregnant with me, but I don't really think that's grounds for relinquishment or separation, Mm-hmm. And my parents would often blame my neurodivergence on substance use, even though I don't really...
Is that a thing? I don't think that's a correlation, is it?
Yeah, exactly. I don't think so either.
And when did you get diagnosed with neurodivergence?
I was like 11 or 12.
Okay.
And this was around the time that I was figuring out my sexuality. I'm very gay. I have a strong preference for men. And I was a very intelligent kid. And I was able to just kind of see my difference and realize that I was gay, and I was maybe using the internet to, you know, speak with other people like me. I was looking up different history and information and getting involved with progressive policies and ideologies. And
even as a young kid?
Yes, I always had a strong sense of justice.
Okay, yeah. A lot of adoptees do. I've noticed that.
Yes. And so as someone who grew up very isolated, you know, I was homeschooled, and my only social interaction was like the church. You know, I was excited to meet other people like me and to kind of deconstruct what I was taught, even at a very young age.
Wow.
And it was a very rough go at it.
I bet. Were you able to talk with your family or the church or anyone about it? Or?
I was reprimanded and disciplined by pretty much every authority figure in my life.
For being gay?
Well, not just being gay, but just questioning things. I'm a very logical, philosophical person, and now I have faith. You know, now I'm very strengthened by my faith. But at the time, I wanted room for questioning.
Yeah, and it sounds like it wasn't quite there for you. That must have been frustrating.
Yeah, but in a roundabout way, that's how I got my Asperger's at the time diagnosis, because my parents were like, oh my gosh, Jeremy is talking to strangers on the internet and he's acting out, so he needs to talk to a psychiatrist, you know, so.
Okay.
And the psychiatrist was like, this child is extremely depressed and also he's autistic.
Okay.
And it's like, I wonder why he was depressed.
Right? Yeah, right. But sometimes things are not mental illness. They're just like circumstances.
Exactly.
I'd be depressed too. And tell me if this is true. I think we don't say Asperger's anymore.
Yeah.
Because he was racist, horrible person, Mr. Asperger.
Yeah, he was like a eugenicist.
Yeah.
And I feel like adoptees are kind of like adjacent to eugenics a little bit.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not cool.
Yeah.
But that's the diagnosis I had.
That was what it was called. Yeah. What do they call it now?
Autism spectrum disorder.
Okay.
And as I got older and really came out of my shell, a lot of people didn't think I fit the profile for autism, frankly. I'm a little offbeat, a little awkward. Sometimes I take things too literally. But, you know, I've always been very social. I've sought out community and social groups and things. And I'm pretty good at eye contact. You know, so people are like, this man can't be autistic.
Oh, yeah. They think that's the one thing. Yeah.
Yeah, for real. And so, like, as I'm learning more, I'm trying to reconnect with that diagnosis and trying to find ways to accommodate myself, you know, because I've struggled with jobs and school and all sorts of things, you know, so I feel hopeful.
Interesting. Very good. Very good. And what other health conditions did you have as a kid that you didn't figure out what they were until you met your family?
I was clumsy. I was kind of seen as lazy. I was always picked last in sports. I would get tired really easily. And I was always kind of like a contortionist. I would be able to do maneuvers with my joints that other people couldn't. And I grew up in the church with another young man who had Marfan's, and he was able to get a diagnosis of Marfan's. And so I saw him, and he was much more severe than me. So I started internalizing that maybe I didn't have a problem. You know, maybe I'm just me. But, you know, as I got older, I tried to just fit in sports. I tried to put myself out there. And even with dating men, I started to realize, like, okay, this guy, he never works out. He never does anything. He just sits around all day. But when it comes to push or shove, you know, he can run down the street and be fine, or he can do a pull up and like his shoulders don't pop out, you know, all these different things. So this was all a long time before I met my birth father. And I didn't have really any diagnoses as a kid. I was just a product of unplanned pregnancy out of wedlock.
With that list of kind of symptoms, I wonder how much of it was attributed to your being gay.
Oh, yeah.
You know, the lack of the sports and lack of kind of get up and go. Was that kind of labeled?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of blocked that out, honestly, but frankly, that was like a big thing. People were like, oh, you know, he's not good at sports because he's gay. Because I was pretty musical as a kid. Like, I liked to play the piano. I was artistic. I wrote stories, you know, like
Yeah.
all sorts of things like that. And so that's what I gravitated toward. But I always wanted to be active.
Yeah.
I have a bit of a competitive side. I really like martial arts. I did karate for a long time, but frankly, when I was given the chance to quit, I quit immediately because I kept on getting worn out.
Okay.
I was good at like kicking above my head.
Okay. So anything with the flexibility. Interesting.
Yeah, I was super flexible. But then when I got to sparring, everyone's like kicking my butt.
Oh, wow. I bet.
Yeah.
Well, and just to be clear, I don't think it's fair for people to say that it was because you're gay. Sexuality has nothing to do with your athletic ability, to be clear. But I can imagine how people maybe of a certain sensibility would think, oh, well, that's because he's gay. So you had several things kind of happening all at once: autism, this physical thing that you didn't even know about, and your sexuality, trying to figure out where you fit in, adoption status, all of these layers. And then you met your dad just a couple of years ago.
It's true. I met him after the pandemic. During 2020, that's when I reached out to my birth mom. I was just working through some things. I had a mental health episode and was just also kind of dealing with some turmoil in my life. And I was like, I want to understand where I come from. You know, so I met my birth mom. And then at the time, she told me who my father was, but I didn't want to reach out because I saw the kind of man he seemed to be and his lifestyle as a very upper class person. And I was really scared to reach out. You know, I saw his wife and my half siblings, and it was interesting because I finally saw someone who looked like me, because I take much more after my birth father in many ways. But it was a really good experience. At the beginning with my birth father, you know, we would text pretty much every day. He was very present for me. And I think that he just felt very betrayed by my birth mother because he genuinely loved her, but she ghosted him before ghosting was a thing.
Did he know that you existed?
No, he never did.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you were surprised to
Yeah, I was. But when I met him, I asked him about medical history. And he is just from kind of a different generation. He's a man, so he didn't really tell me much. He was like, well, there's just some crazies in the family and a little bit of obesity and a lot of depression. But, you know, other than that, we're fine. But a lot of people are just kind of lazy. You know what I mean?
Oh, okay.
So he wasn't very helpful. And that was kind of what I was left with until last year, because I started kind of uncovering a lot of medical issues last year. I started out with figuring out that I had asthma, because I never realized I had asthma. I just thought I couldn't run far.
That's why you got tired so quickly. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I ended up getting an asthma diagnosis. And so then by that point, I had already lost my job. I had to go on short-term disability, which didn't really pay very well, you know, all these different things. And I was a lot more sedentary during my whole couldn't breathe episode.
Yeah, I don't doubt it.
Then I started having like all the like joint pain and stuff that I didn't really realize. And I had recently gotten a lot closer with my birth father's sisters. So his younger sister was always so welcoming to me and so present for me. And she went out of her way to meet me when I went to Colorado. And she started telling me, maybe you should really look into Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, because she had the diagnosis, but it's really hard to get a diagnosis. And I hadn't wanted to pursue it up to that point.
Okay. Can you tell us what Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, right? Is that close?
I call it EDS.
EDS is easier.
It's such a mouthful.
Yeah.
So it's a connective tissue disease. There's many different varieties, but I have the most common type. It's called hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. It is a genetic disease or syndrome or whatever. I think it's a deficit, honestly, like it is a disease, but basically your gene for a certain type of collagen is faulty. So instead of a really good spiral, it's just kind of loose and gets stretched out really easily.
Okay.
But it can affect your blood vessels. It can affect your ligaments and tendons. And if I stretch out my ligaments, then they don't really come back to place. Like they just get stretched out forever.
Okay.
So I've injured myself before where I hyperextend myself and then it just gets worse indefinitely. And so it's pretty intense and it has a lot of comorbidities. So there is comorbidities such as dysautonomia, which is where you have a disorder of your autonomic nervous system, which affects your breathing, ability to digest, the ability to sweat, your heart rate, all these different things that we do without thinking. And so I also have dysautonomia, which has progressively gotten worse. So that's very difficult at times. There's also digestive issues. Like there's a lot, it's like a full constellation of health problems. And the thing is, it's really hard to get a doctor to see you as like an EDS person. You might go to the allergist for mast cell, or you might go to an orthopedist or like a chiropractor for your joints. You might go over to the cardiologist for your POTS, So you're just kind of playing this wild goose chase. It's really hard to find a provider who treats the whole person. And I think that many people can relate to that, whether they are an EDS person. Well, we're called zebras, If you're a zebra or not, you can probably relate to that.
Yeah. And I understand it was your aunt that also has EDS that helped you kind of navigate and advocate for yourself in the medical world.
Yes. No, she was so helpful because my birth father was like, yeah, we're hypermobile. And he's like, if you lost weight, you would have less joint problems.
Does he have it too, your dad?
Yeah, he passed it down to me. We got it from his father. So my father's father passed it down to all three of his kids. And then my birth father has it and I have it. It's hereditary and it's dominant.
But it sounds like your dad doesn't take it very seriously or isn't as educated about it as your aunt.
I think it's just a lot of men don't like to go to the doctor.
Yeah. It's just that. But your aunt has been really helpful.
Well, she worked in the medical field and so did my other aunt.
Nice.
She was a medical assistant for a family practice doctor. So she's just always been very medically inclined. She had a long-term goal of getting her RN, but her EDS symptoms got unmanageable at a certain age, especially after she had kids.
Oh, I bet.
But the diagnosis process was really difficult because it's very specific criteria. They changed the criteria a couple years ago. And so you have to do this 9-point scale where you get 5 or more points for different joint maneuvers that are hypermobile. And so for me, based on my hypermobility, I just got a 4 out of 9. Mostly because I'm a man, mostly because I'm a little bit stiffer. There's a lot of muscle tightness for a lot of EDS people because our muscles are holding us together instead of our ligaments. And I've had people tell me that before. They like squeeze me or touch me or whatever. And then they're just like, oh my gosh, you're like super solid for no reason. Why are you so tight and tense all the time? So it was hard because I didn't pass that height scale. And I don't have stretchy skin. And that's a big one. A lot of people think of stretchy skin for EDS, but they think that hypermobile EDS is a bunch of different genes altogether because they haven't found the gene for it yet. So I think it can manifest in different ways, but I definitely have a lot of the systemic and comorbid issues. So I finally was able to get a diagnosis just earlier this year. And it was because I really, frankly, needed the diagnosis because I wanted to do physical therapy. I wanted to get referral to a cardiologist. I wanted to get a referral to a physiatrist. But also, I wanted to have a diagnosis in case my symptoms get debilitating. That way, maybe I could apply for disability. But I mostly am just looking for a work from home job type situation where maybe I can manage it more.
Sure. Now, what would your life have been different if you had known from day one that you had the genetic possibility of having EDS or autism or asthma or any of the things? How would you have been labeled differently? How would that have changed things for you?
Know how I would have been labeled differently, but I think that my identity formation would have happened at an earlier age and have been more stable and less self-loathing, frankly. Because pretty much all of my health conditions were seen as a personal deficit or like my effeminacy, which isn't a word we use too much anymore, but I was labeled that all the time. Just like me being like fruity and sassy and fun, it was like seen as very negative.
But no, I think that's awesome today, but
I know, so you don't really hear that too often these days.
No.
But It was rough. And when I met my birth father and his children, my half siblings, we sat down at the dinner table, and I've always been a picky eater.
Mm-hmm.
And my parents tried to accommodate it, but they just got exhausted of it, you know? And autism is pretty common to have interesting eating habits and sensory issues and all the things. And so when I sat down with them to have dinner, 2 out of 3 of my siblings were really picky with their foods, just like moving food around and didn't want to touch and only ate certain things and like refused to touch certain things and were repulsed by it. And I was like, wow, this is so similar to me as a kid, you know?
Okay.
And so that was really interesting. And having multiple cousins who have EDS, having one sibling so far with confirmed EDS, which, you know, isn't really a great thing. I wish she didn't have EDS, but having that similarity is really cool. Just being around people who look like you and think like you is really essential because, frankly, my birth father, we had really similar personalities and temperaments. And honestly, as someone who grew up in not my family of origin, and I grew up in an adopted family with lots of super tall, strong veterans, you know, and things like that, I never really saw a grown man who embodied his masculinity in a healthy way that was actually attainable for me.
Okay.
You know, so when I met my birth father, I felt a lot more comfortable in my masculinity, even as a gay person. You know, I finally saw it embodied. So that was really helpful for me. And so I can't turn back the clock. There's so many what ifs. But I think that just knowing where I came from really helped me. And also, once I got to my reunion, I was able to get a lot more credibility from doctors.
Okay. Because then you said, look, I have 3 aunts and 6 cousins or however many that have this thing.
Yeah.
So it's a lot better than leaving everything blank because you're adopted. They can't do anything with that.
Yes, that's so true. And it's just a clear sign that there is a systemic disparity between us as adoptees and people who do have access to their medical history in, you know, Western countries.
What can healthcare professionals or community members, allies, or adoptive families do better to serve the needs of adoptees relating to their medical diagnoses and healthcare? What can we do differently besides just stop closed adoptions? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the biggest thing is just unlearning ableism, unlearning gaslighting, unlearning this kind of pull yourself up by your own bootstraps mentality. And I've started joining EDS Facebook groups and meeting with other zebras. And honestly, a lot of them are very similar to me. I'm like, are y'all my cousins? Like, it's such a beautiful connection and we have a lot in common.
Oh, it feels good.
But, you know, I've seen the parents who advocate for their children, whether it's adopted or not, or biological or not. And I feel like the parents who do the best job with their kids get a second opinion if they have money and ability. Like sometimes they even travel for their kids.
Go to a bigger city or something.
Yeah, they go to another city. And I feel like just acknowledging like that the pain or difficulties are real, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that healthcare providers, honestly, here's what I want. And this one's just funny. I hate when I go to a doctor or a psychiatrist or anybody, like physical therapist, and then I'm like, okay, here's my medical history. Here is my profile as someone who has complex trauma and who did all these things. I hate when people say that my life should be a movie.
Oh, okay.
Can we just ban that phrase?
Stop doing that.
I wish that we could ban that phrase.
All right. You don't want to be a superstar with all of that.
Well, if my life's going to be a movie, then can you pay me? Or I always say that if I were to be in a movie, because the last time someone told this to me, I was like, maybe we could have a movie, but Chris Pratt has to play me.
All right. Well, that's reasonable. Totally. You look like Chris Pratt.
Thank you.
Well, that is very good advice. I'm sure that feels not good. I'm sure people don't mean for it not to feel good, but it is kind of shocking to hear the list of things that you're having to deal with. And I have so much compassion and empathy for having to walk with that every day, not only the physical pains and limitations or whatever, but the character defamation that you experience probably on the daily from family members and people in the culture that just don't understand. I think you call it an invisible disability.
It is invisible. And thank you for bringing that up. It is an invisible disability. And a lot of people who have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome wait years and years and years to get a diagnosis.
Okay.
I know people who are in their 40s and 50s still searching for a diagnosis, and they can't find anyone to diagnose them.
Wow.
And so it's very debilitating. And I think that there is hope. I think physical therapy helps. Okay. I do think that getting the right team of doctors around you helps, but it is invisible. And even after I got my diagnosis, sometimes I'll see a doctor and they want to assess me and try to undiagnose me. And it's like, no, we're not going back and forth. I'm already in the acceptance stage of my diagnosis. So if you could heal me, like you're healed of Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, then you're so friggin' magical. But I don't think that any doctor is that way.
It sounds like the kind of thing that you just have to manage, and it doesn't have a cure at this point.
Yeah, there's no cure of EDS. It is an ongoing medical condition. It's genetic. It is not progressive necessarily, not hypermobile. There's many different kinds that have different comorbidities and can shorten the lifespan. But the most common type, hypermobile EDS, doesn't necessarily have a shortened lifespan, but you definitely have to keep up with it.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. Well, I hope that everybody listening learned a lot today about, just the many layers that adoptees have to carry with them, and about the importance of knowing your genetics. I mean, it's no small thing. There could be something like EDS in your background. You have no idea. There's so many things that are passed down genetically that it sure would be nice if adoptees knew that from day one. It's something we can all continue to work on. And to not label people as character flaws or negative things, or label birth parents too, right? We adoptive parents, we need to be very careful the way we reflect upon our kids as birth parents, because that's them. And so whenever you denigrate the birth parents, you're denigrating your child, and just have to be really thoughtful about what you're saying about people. So
I'm so glad you said that, but thank you.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you for sharing your story. And I know that your story and your telling of it will help a lot of people today.
Oh, thank you. I'm so pleased to have come on, and I really appreciate this opportunity. So thank you again.
Are you open to people getting a hold of you?
Yes. So I do have an Adoptee Instagram. It's currently on hiatus because I'm busy going to the doctor a lot. I do answer my DMs, and I post on my stories sometimes. And it's called Borderline Adoptee with no space.
Okay.
It is open to the public. Anyone can follow me or reach out. And I love meeting with other people in the adoption triad, so I'm always open to it.
Okay, great. I'll put the link to that Borderline Adoptee on Instagram.
Thank you.
I'll put the link to that in the notes. And while you're on the internet, everybody, go look up Unraveling Adoption at unravelingadoption.com. We have a lot of events, and there's ways to support us through Patreon. And I also do coaching, so you can find out all about that at our website. Okay, well, thank you everyone for listening. Please pass this along to anyone you know that might be an adoptive parent, or maybe an adoptee seeking reunion, or with health issues, or maybe you know some healthcare professionals that would be enlightened by listening to this conversation. So pass it along, help us grow, help more people be able to hear this important information. I wanted to take this opportunity to do a big shout out to 2 new members of our Patreon community. These are folks that are helping with a donation each month to help us with our operating expenses. Thank you to Beth Syverson and Joe Leitner. I very much appreciate your support. If anyone else would like to join Patreon, it's easy to do and easy to change if you ever need to change it. It's at patreon.com/unravelingadoption. Thanks to all of our wonderful Patreon supporters. Well, thanks again for listening. Jeremy and I want you all to stay safe.